Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. Today, we are talking about puberty and how to discuss puberty with your kids. Joining us is Dr. Trish Hutchinson, MD, and she is a board certified pediatrician, nationally recognized health educator, and author. Dr. Trish is co-founder and chief medical officer of Uology, a leading girls' health organization, and Dr. Trish founded and directed a young women's health center for the Department of Adolescent Medicine at the Medical University of South Carolina. She's an expert on adolescent development, teen sexuality, and parenting, and she has been listed among the best doctors in America. She's also co-founded the Period Education Project, a non-for-profit organization providing menstrual health education to underserved groups throughout the country. So a huge thank you to Dr. Hutchinson for joining us today. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad to be here and talk about puberty. Isn't it exciting?
Absolutely.
I love it.
To our viewers, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments section and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Let's get started. So first off, what sort of big picture do parents need to know about how to approach puberty with their children? What are some maybe overall tips that you have when you're talking to parents about puberty?
And I'm gonna sound like a broken record through the next 30 minutes, but start as early as possible. It is so important. Don't wait for these changes of puberty to happen. In our live programs where we run, what we realize is that kids, when they hear about it before the body changes happen, they're so excited about getting a breast bud or hair. I mean, they're like, yes. But if they're in the throes of puberty, they're kind of mortified by it all. But I will say, if you're a parent with a child right now that's in the throes, it's not too late. Just dive right in and do the best you can. The other, it sounds really weird, but get excited about it. Reiterate all the awesome things that are about to happen to their body. This puberty thing happens because they're going to transition from a child to adult and they can make babies one day if they choose. So it's really pretty exciting. The other, I'm going to run on and on. I can keep going on this topic because this is so exciting. Please, parents, make sure you always use anatomically correct terms. This is so important. From the very beginning, when they're in the bathtub as toddlers, going eyes, nose, ears, they should be able to say vulva, penis, use those words. It is so important because if you're not using these proper terms, then kids feel like these body parts are dirty or gross, and we don't want any shame about these body parts. And on a side note, when you educate kids with proper anatomical terms, it is actually sexual abuse prevention. Some kids will come up and say somebody's played with their pocketbook and nobody knows what it is. But if they use the correct anatomical terms, I mean, that makes a huge difference. And when you're talking about these terms, make sure you let them know what's private. And that is just amazing sexual abuse prevention. I know that's a deep subject, but I just want to express the importance of that. And the other I think is really important with puberty is you need to normalize normal. Reinforce with your kids that puberty is simply a series of body changes that every child goes through. Animals go through it. Everybody goes through it. And so you don't want them to feel scared or ashamed about those body changes. So just normalize it. We all do it. I went through puberty. You know, they're like, you did? You went through puberty? So it's kind of funny when they hear parents say, I went through puberty. And the last tip on kids that are going through puberty, how to handle is respect their privacy. With all these body changes, your child may actually want more privacy and may become more modest. Some are like, woohoo, running around naked. And some are like, won't let you in the changing room. It's just, but just respect it. And always knock before you enter the room and never force yourself into that changing room if you're not invited. So those are some tips around just how to handle this whole puberty thing at home initially.
That's helpful. So start early, use correct terminology, be respectful. I mean, a lot of this makes so much sense, but it is funny how squeamish that so many people get around these topics. And I do wonder if so much of that goes back to, you know, when we were kids and like, oh God, when I went through that. So that's one of my questions is, how should these conversations with our children maybe be different than the ones that we had probably as kids growing up? So my big picture question is like, how has this conversation evolved? How has it changed over the decades?
The first thing is have the conversation. because a lot of us never had the conversation. I remember sitting in sixth grade gym class with that tape, the big movie on the 8 reel going, and they were talking about breast buds, and I was mortified. I was pulling my shirt down so my breast wouldn't show, So the main thing is just have the conversation with your kids, because a lot of us are really nervous about it because we never did, right? So I think that's really important. And a lot of kids will start their period without knowing about their periods. It's sad how often that happens. So I just want to reiterate, if you're uncomfortable with it, say you're awkward about having it, but just dive in and have those conversations. And when you're having it, and I mentioned this before, take away the shame and embarrassment. Periods aren't dirty. Breasts have a wonderful purpose. Masturbation is normal. Just be careful of your delivery when you're talking about it. It goes back to that get exciting part, but just remember that all this is normal and kids really need to hear about it. I think something that's really important is when I was growing up, my mom only told me about girls' puberty. It was never about any other gender. And these days, I think it's really important to include all genders and all kids, right? Kids need to understand what happens to each other. And that's really why we wrote Uology, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But I think that's really important because kids need to respect each other, and they need to understand, yeah, girls have issues with periods, and both have breast, and boys have erections. So all this comes together. But one important thing, when people would come to our Girlology programs, they would check off the box. I had my puberty talk, boop, boop, I'm done, right? It's not just one and done. It's not just one big talk. Puberty lasts about 3 to 5 years. So it's really important for parents to have lots of small, short conversations instead of that one big talk. And you can use all kinds of things. You can use the media, TV shows, commercials, music, cousins, older brothers, older sisters, little kids, whatever you need to, but just try to have those short snippet conversations occasionally. And when you are having the conversation, be an active listener. I don't know how often parents in our generation were actually active listeners. They had an opinion to deliver and that was it. And then you were done, right? You didn't get to talk. So I think it's really important. Give some information and listen to what the questions or thoughts that your child has to determine what you should talk about next. Because you know what? Your kids probably actually know more than you think they know, because they have this thing right here that they can get anything or any information from. And so I think they really know more than we actually think they know. I think I had Encyclopedia Britannica where, penis was like, all those things. It was in the old days, but I think those are important things to incorporate, that the conversation should be totally different from we were growing up or when I was growing up.
That's helpful too, to think that really these should be shorter conversations that are happening naturally on the fly, and then to use sort of these teachable moments as they come up, and you were suggesting, whether it be media of some kind, it's a book they're reading or listening to the radio or whatever, where it just comes up naturally. And I think often parents are a little bit overwhelmed by, oh God, how do I do this? And how do I scaffold these conversations? And just being a little bit more relaxed and just waiting for them to come up. Though I know, one of the things that you're saying is don't wait for the perfect moment, because, it might not ever happen. So make sure that you are just, having them as they can come up. I think that's helpful. What are maybe some common questions that you are seeing coming from parents?
One question, we get several. One is, how do I know when they've started puberty? When am I supposed to have this conversation? So how do I know they've started? Girls are more obvious. 8 out of 10 girls start with breast buds anywhere between the ages of 8 and 12. And so they're pretty obvious, but 2 out of 10 girls will start with pubic hair, which is a little less obvious, but they're usually not as modest when that pubic hair hits. So you may notice it. And boys are not so obvious. It's their testicles starting to get bigger. And we don't know about that one. I don't think most parents would be noticing testicular size. So it's kind of hard to know. So girls start puberty anywhere between the ages of 8 and 12, and boys start puberty anywhere between the ages of 9 and 14. So that's one of the questions we get often. Another is, when is the right time to start the conversation? And I already said earlier, before changes happen. I think that's really important, because they actually get really, really excited about it. Another question we get is, can I say too much? Parents are sometimes worried of the opposite, not saying enough or saying too much, but or is my child too young to actually hear this information? And you know your child best, right? But truly, if it's medically accurate information about how the body changes and they're asking questions about it, you really can't tell them too much.
Mhm.
Make sure if they're asking questions about it, then you need to answer those questions in an age appropriate manner. Now, you're not
Mhm.
going to go off about menstrual cups when they're 8, but you're going to maybe talk about how you start your period with using pads. So I think it's really important that it's really hard to say too much these days. And you're going to, you know, your kid more than we do. And then the other one is, what if I don't know the answer when they ask me a question? Some parents feel like they're inept to handle the situation, right? And, you know, it's okay. Let them know that you're going to help them find the answer. Parents
Right.
aren't supposed to be smart in every subject out there, right? You asked me to do finances, I would be like, whoa, I have no idea what you're talking about. Or,
Right.
you know, so I think it's really important. So you can find the answer somehow or outsource it. Never feel guilty about outsourcing if you can find the proper resource. Don't outsource to TikTok or things like that, but definitely find a proper resource that has medically accurate information. And, you know, it's okay to say, I'm not sure, but I'll help you find the answer.
Right,
So,
right, right. Yeah, that makes so much sense too. And as you were saying, let your child be the guide of this exploration as
mhm.
you maybe go on this journey together, and you sort of let them take the lead. What are maybe some common parent blunders
Hmm.
or pitfalls that they by accident stumble into? And then what are your recommendations on how to avoid them?
Pitfalls or blunders. Okay, I've done this, so I'm going to be honest. As I said, kids actually know more than we think they know. With the digital age these days, in our programs, we actually get questions from 4th and 5th graders. Sometimes it'll be about pornography or all kind of things, and they have heard words, but they don't know the meaning. So they may
Mm,
go up and ask parents, and parents may be shocked to hear about some of these things they've learned from their digital devices or from their friends. So the biggest parent blunder is when a parent freaks out.
mm,
We've all done it, right?
mhm, mhm.
So parents sometimes freak out when they see that their kids have seen something or ask questions that they feel they're too young to ask or understand. And so what happens is when they freak out, the number one reason kids stop going to their parents is because their parents freak out when they ask them something about sex or bodies. And when that happens, it sets up a red flag for kids, and kids go, my parents can't handle this, so I'm never going to go back to them again.
Right, right.
So how to handle it, parents, if you see them coming, take a deep breath. You can say, I need a timeout for a few minutes to get yourself together, but be really careful. In Girlology, we actually have these buttons that say, don't freak out, that we give the kids to wear. So if the kids know they have a question that might trigger their parents, they put it on and the parents will go like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready. But I think that's a big one. I think it's really hard these days with everything that kids know and parents feel uncomfortable with them, that we need to stay calm,
Mhm,
calm.
mhm,
So that would be the biggest blunder. The other I see these days with everything going on in the world is parents are really stressed out. You know,
mm,
they're working 24/7. Sometimes they can't ever put their phone down. They're working through right here at home with their computer, and a kid comes up, knocks on the door and has a question. And if the parents don't take the time to answer it, then they've missed an amazing opportunity to educate and connect with their kids.
mhm.
So, parents, if kids knock on the door and have a question about their bodies or relationships or anything like that, please try to put things down. If you're in the middle of a Zoom meeting, I get it, but make sure you circle back and you go answer it, because if you don't go answer it, they're going to go somewhere else to find that information, and it may not be medically correct information. So,
Mhm, mhm.
those are two blunders I can think about.
Yeah,
And I've done
yeah.
both. I've failed at both.
I suppose that makes me feel better.
Yes.
Because yeah, you're right. I mean, parents freak out all the time and we can't help it. But you're also right that, if a kid sees that happening and they're like, oh, you're just too much to deal with. And
Yes.
um, I think parents just need to be brave and strong. And that's so much easier to say than to do. Because I'm a parent of two girls, and it's really hard.
It
So
is.
like, of course, be strong. But I love the idea of the button that you provide and that it's totally for the parents, not for the kids. It's just sort of like, okay, parents, like
Yep.
you can handle
Here I
this.
come. And kids can make their own, right? We've had people that just make a piece of paper with, I'm coming, just some signal for the parents. So parents, if you hear this, this is a great activity to do at home. Hey, let's make some signal, whether it be a word, a sign, a button, anything that you can think of. I think it's a cool activity to do. And it's just for the parents to take a deep breath. So
definitely. Yeah. I think that's such a great idea. I think it's brilliant. So one of my questions, which we've talked about, is like, why are these conversations so important to have? And you've mentioned that, like, well, if we don't have them as parents, kids are going to go someplace else because they're going to find out this information, whether we like it or not. And, this is important information because if they don't get it, you said that it's going to be really scary. All these
yeah.
changes are happening and you don't understand why. Are there any other sort of reasons that you're like, you need to have this conversation because, and sort of to be like, right, like parents, just more information so they have it?
Yes, absolutely. The reason why parents or caregivers need to have these conversations is it sets them up to be the go-to person when kids have questions.
Mm.
So if kids know that mom and dad and somebody's comfortable talking to me about this, then when I have a question, I know. And it is so important to have a go-to person instead of other places that are unsafe. So I think that's really important. And the other cool part of it is when you're talking to them with these subjects, you get to weave in family beliefs and values. Now, schools aren't going to do that. Nowhere else can do that. So if you decide to outsource these topics to school or anybody else, make sure you take the time to weave that in, because that's your responsibility as a parent or a caregiver. And if you're the go-to person, you're having these conversations, you can let them know what your family values are. I think that's so important. And the other is with these conversations, when we teach kids about their bodies, they become more self-aware. And when they're more self-aware, they're more confident with the changes that are about to happen. And then, when they're confident, they're better able to take care of themselves. And this really leads to respecting themselves and others. So that's a whole nother gamut of them understanding what's about to happen because they face it with more confidence and less anxiety. So go-to person, definitely believe weave those family values in there and help them face those changes with more confidence.
That's really important. So we talked a little bit, you mentioned that, we really need to be educating both boys and girls on periods and erections. And you mentioned, the importance of sort of respecting each other and knowing that, okay, we're all sort of in this together. We're all going through changes together. Are there any other reasons, do you think that and this would be different from when I was a kid? Because I feel like, the girls were put in the girl room and the boys were put in the boys room. And not that it was a terrible mystery, because as you said, kids always know more than adults think they do, but it did sort of feel like, oh, we're going over there and they're going over there. Why is it so important that we have this conversation, and that both genders are learning about each other?
I think it helps these days if kids really understand what everyone is going through, everybody is going through. That way they're not alone. Each person is going through this unique process called puberty. Girls have periods, and if they understand guys have weird things like erections and ejaculations, it just makes it easier. And when guys learn about periods, they're so immature when they see pads and tampons and things like that. But once they understand the process of what's going on, they become more mature about it, and teasing really decreases. And so this decrease in teasing, actually, they respect each other more, and they realize that, I think girls just think, well, we have periods. What do guys go through? They don't go through anything, and guys go, well, I got these erections and ejaculations. What are girls? Well, they do have their period. But I think it's just really helpful for them to understand that we're all going through some crazy changes with puberty. And the other thing is that when kids learn together about this process, it really helps them communicate about their bodies. And communicating in this way sets up a stage for successful relationships in the future, right? So if kids can learn the body parts, what's going on, all that kind of stuff, when they're in a relationship down the road, it will help them talk more easily and, help maybe understand consent and express some boundaries with each other. So it just makes the language and speaking about bodies a lot easier if they learn about what each other's going through.
They're all starting sort of on a common ground, and
Yep.
they have that foundational language. And I imagine that then it's like, oh, well, if something goes wrong or if I'm feeling uncomfortable, it's like, okay, we all know what's going on together and I can stick up for myself.
Yep.
What about recommendations for parents when talking to kids about sexual and gender identity?
Yeah. So, and I said that this needs to be included, right? I think these days people need to be more understanding, and we need to teach kids that everyone has a gender identity, right? And the only way to know somebody's gender identity is to ask, because you
Mm,
can't tell by their body parts or how they're dressing or anything of what their gender identity is. And so just ask them.
mhm,
And another point is that we need to be teaching our kids three different entities. And one is we need to teach kids about sex assigned at birth. And these are terms that you can weave into your conversations. And sex assigned at birth, you'll see a lot out there. Obviously, if you have a vulva, you're a female. I say vulva, not vagina. People mess that up. Outside parts are vulva, not a vagina. Vagina is part of the vulva. If you're born with a penis, then you're a male, right? So that's sex assigned at birth. And then you have gender identity, and that is how someone identifies themselves. And it may have nothing to do with their sex assigned at birth. And
mhm,
then there's gender expression, and that's how someone expresses their identity. So all these things, they're interrelated, but they're
mhm.
not dependent on each other. And I know as parents, you're like going, this is so confusing. I know it is. I get it. But as I said, kids are smart about this. They probably have a gender diverse kid in their classroom. Just ask them, and definitely start the conversation and ask them, do they understand what sex assigned at birth means? Ask them what identity means. And, can you tell how that person expresses themselves, what their identity is? And I think it's conversations that we can actually learn a lot from our kids. I know we're talking about what we should be teaching our kids, but we can learn a lot from them. I think that's really important with that.
Yeah, and I know something you had said earlier is start young, and it's so much easier to have these conversations when they're younger, and because then they're just open. They're open, and their heart is open, and they're just like, oh yeah, sure, that's totally cool, like not a big deal. My oldest is 4, and we've talked about pronoun choices, and
Good for
they're
you.
well, and she's already experienced people who are transgender, and it as a parent, it's like, this is my job to
Yeah.
make sure that she understands what's going on and that she's being respectful.
Yeah.
So we've already sort of dived into that conversation, and obviously, as you said, it's a spiral curriculum, and we're going to come back and again and again and again. Um, but she, I didn't know how she was going to take it. And she was just like, oh yeah, sure.
Oh,
They want to be
yeah.
called they. Great. I can do
Fun.
that. And I was like, oh, why couldn't you talk to my grandmother?
I was going to say, if you tell a 60-year-old they're going to get into like grammar.
I know. I know. Really, really interesting. So in some ways, I think it's way easier to have these conversations with your kids than maybe it is with your parents or
Yes.
grandparents.
Yes.
So with that, let's talk a little bit about transgender kids and their experience with puberty. What are the best ways to support transgendered kids through puberty, and whether that you are a parent with a transgendered child, or whether there's just a transgendered child in your community that you interact with on a daily basis and you want to make sure that you're being supportive as possible.
So I'm going to use the term gender diverse instead of transgender, because I'm just going to include the group of
Mhm,
all the
mhm,
kids. So
mhm,
transgender kids and gender diverse kids are just like any other kids. There are many gender diverse kids in every school, whether you realize it or not. You may not
mhm,
even know it when you see them. But again, ask your kids about it. It's interesting. So puberty can be very distressing to gender diverse kids as their bodies begin to change in a way that is not aligned with who they are.
mhm.
And I think it's really important to know that there are doctors and therapists out there that can help gender diverse kids with the process of puberty. But you as parents, I want you to be open and listening to gender diverse kids and meeting them where they are. I know this is really hard, but you need to like affirm their experiences and feelings wherever they may be. No judgment, no assumptions. Now, I have a couple of friends whose kids have transitioned. It was really hard for them because they raised this sweet little girl who loved to cook, and now he doesn't want to wear dresses anymore. So as a parent, I understand the angst, and it's hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
But showing them love and the support wherever they are in their self-discovery is always the right approach. This is what all kids need: love and support. And so that's what we need to do to help them out. The other is try to find other adults that are gender diverse or transgender. You can learn from them. Your kids can feel more comfortable because they may see their path. And the other is, please make sure your healthcare provider that your child is seeing knows about gender.
Mm-hmm.
Show love and support. I know it's hard. I know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a great piece of advice, is making sure that your pediatrician or doctor, is making sure that you're on the same page and that you're going to support each other.
Right.
That's a good reminder. So I want to pivot just a little bit, and I want to just learn a little bit about your book, Uology, and learn how it's different maybe from other resources that are out there about puberty, and why we all need to have it on our shelves.
Awesome. So Uology came about. My partner with Girlology is another physician. She's an OBGYN, and we've been teaching puberty classes for over 20 years. And we started by separating gender, and we even have puberty books for boys and girls. But over the years, we realized that kids need to learn about breasts. They need to learn about periods, erections, to grow up to be more empathetic and supportive. So we were in the process of updating our book into one that talked about how all bodies change during puberty, boys and girls at that time. Then the American Academy of Pediatrics approached us because they had interest in an inclusive puberty book that teaches that puberty that includes all bodies of all gender identities. And Dr. Catherine Lowe, who's a third member of our Uology team, had approached them about this. And so the puzzle pieces just came together, and it was an amazing COVID project. And I really appreciate the team effort, the three of us. It was just a lot of fun. And so Uology is different in the fact that it does provide medically accurate information. We're all three physicians. We're also moms. And we just talk about how puberty works for everybody. And we talk about puberty in a way that is inclusive of all kids, and it includes all gender identities. And I know that may scare some parents, but the book is really great for cisgender, meaning kids that are comfortable with the sex they're born with. It's comfortable for transgender kids that feel opposite than the sex that they were born with, and some kids that just don't feel like a boy or a girl, neither or both at times. So it's all in there, and I think it's great for parents to read as well, just to educate them to understand the terminology and how kids are feeling. So that's kind of interesting. That's what we did.
When would you recommend sharing that with your child? So you were saying that puberty tends to start for girls around 8 and then boys just a tad older, but then, the importance of making sure that we're talking about this way before it happens. So when would you actually give them the book, and how would a parent interact with their child with your book?
That is a great question, because so many parents just take the book and say, go read it, right? And that's the easy way out. And that's okay. If you need to do that to educate them, that's okay. But what we really would like for parents to do is to read the book themselves first, or read it with their kids. And age-wise, parents know their kids better. If it's a girl that isn't even showing anything by 11, but her classmates are going through puberty, she may need the book a little bit earlier. And so we really recommend the book 4th grade, 5th grade, around in that area. But there's snippets of the book that you can actually go through earlier with your kid if you want to. But if you just hand them the book and they're reading a section and they have a question, if you told them you've read it, come to me when you have a question, there you go. But if they're like, oh my God, I'm reading about masturbation, what am I going to do? I can't talk to mom about this. She hasn't read this yet. So, I think it's great. We have a lot of families that have book clubs where they read one chapter at a time. We have moms and daughters that just take 30 minutes a week and just read a chapter. It just depends on your timeline. But as parents, we would prefer parents to be involved in the conversation, because then again, that's the way you get to continue the conversations and down the road have those important conversations about families' beliefs and values.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The cool thing about the book that I forgot to mention is in the chapters, we don't separate boys and girls. In the anatomy chapter, it's boys and girls anatomy. Body odors, we have a chapter. Breast and chest, we actually have puberty gear where we talk about, bras and athletic cups. So every chapter is combined, that nothing is segregated binary. So it's really, it was, like I said, it was just a fun book to write.
It seems super inclusive. So no matter who's reading it, they're like, oh, okay, yep, I fall into this category somewhere.
That's our goal, is for each kid to see themselves in this book. We have a great cast of characters, which I think a lot of people will see them. A lot of kids will see themselves as one of the characters. So they have cute stories. And then we just have great art throughout. It's not just it's written for the kids. So it's written directed to the kids, not the parents. So.
Do you have any advice for parents who are excited about this and ready to talk to their kids, but maybe the kids are like, no, I don't want to talk about this. Do you have any advice for that situation when the kid is squeamish and uncomfortable, but the parents gung ho?
They're ready. This happens quite often. And again, if you catch your kids before they hear anything, they don't know to feel squeamish about it. But if your kid is feeling squeamish, they've obviously heard or seen or something's happened in that situation. And I think it's a great dialogue for the parents to say, okay, why are you so uncomfortable with this conversation? And they may not be able to tell you. Maybe they have to write it out. Maybe they text it, just however the information comes. But if you still can't break through, the best thing to do is to leave the book in their room. We have downloadables with information. Just leave stuff out and accessible for them to see on their own time. Don't keep push and nagging at them, because that's not going to work. They're going to run away even further. Just politely leave things around, oh, look here, here's a puberty timeline. Look here, here's what's normal for your period, So, but I think just supplying the book, reading it yourself, if they're that way, put it by their bedside table. I had one mom say she found it underneath the bed 2 years later. She's not sure if the kid ever read it or not. So I know there are some personalities of kids that are just like, so I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other resources that you would recommend when parents, if maybe the parents are struggling, whether it be anywhere within the topic of puberty, maybe they do have a child who is transgendered, or maybe that they have a child who is expressing interest in the same gender and exploring their sexuality. Or maybe it's just that kid who's just like, I can't handle this. I don't want to talk about it. Do you have any other places that you recommend parents go?
So I will, of course, recommend Girlology. I know it's very binary, and that's why we wrote Uology. But if you have a child that's assigned female at birth or identifies as a female, then we really got you covered. Melissa, my other physician partner, we have 5 girls between our 2 families. So we feel like we know girls, but anyway. We do have Guyology out there as well, binary as well. And then there's going to be more to come on Uology. We're just really excited about this. And if you need help teaching or explaining gender diversity and acceptance, there is the Gender Spectrum webpage, which is absolutely phenomenal. And I would love to get more resources to you. I'm going to look to Katie Lowe on that, who's our third person, who's amazing. That's our national spokesperson on gender. So I will get those to you that you can put them somewhere close to this video. Perfect. For parents that need any help with that.
Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to Dr. Trish Hutchinson and all of your work with Uology and all of your expertise. Thank you also to all of our viewers and listeners today. Make sure that you do visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on Chesapeake Family Life in video and podcast form. And then we will put up those resources as well that Dr. Hutchinson mentioned. So those will just be easy for you to click right there. I'm Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thanks so much.
Thank you.